What would you do if the man who broke your heart 10 years ago suddenly reappeared as the most dangerous person in the city, and your survival now depended on him? Maya Chen was about to find out that some loves never die, they just become infinitely more complicated. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. The rain hammered against the windows of Chen's antique shop in downtown Seattle as Maya counted the register for the third time, hoping the numbers would somehow change. They didn't. $63,000. That's what her uncle's gambling debts had cost her, debts she'd only discovered existed after his sudden death 3 months ago. The lawyer had been clinical about it. Men in expensive suits don't waste emotion on people who can't pay. She had 30 days to settle the accounts, or the shop, her apartment above it, and everything she'd built in the last decade would belong to someone else. Someone the lawyer only referred to as the organization. Maya was 32 years old, and she'd learned to handle adversity. Growing up as a Black woman in a predominantly Asian neighborhood had taught her resilience. Her anthropology degree from the University of Washington sat framed on the wall, a reminder of dreams that had given way to reality when her parents died in a car accident during her senior year. She dropped out to care for Uncle Chen, her mother's brother, who'd taken her in when she was 18 and lost. He'd given her the shop, taught her about jade and porcelain and the stories objects carry. Now those stories felt like ghosts, haunting her with memories of a man who'd chosen silence over explanation when he died. The shop bell chimed, an incongruous, cheerful sound against the storm's percussion. Maya looked up, instinctively reaching for the baseball bat she kept under the counter. It was past closing time. She'd locked the door hours ago. The man who stepped through shouldn't have been able to enter at all. Yet, here he stood, water sliding off a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His umbrella was black, expensive, and he closed it with the precise movements of someone accustomed to control. When he looked at her, Maya's world tilted sideways. Kenji Tanaka. The boy she'd loved when she was 22, the graduate student in international business who'd studied at the same university, who'd kissed her in the rain outside the Burke Museum and promised her everything. The man who disappeared without a word 10 years ago, leaving only a note that said he had to return to Japan, that she should forget him, that she deserved better. She'd searched for him, called every number she had, but he'd vanished like smoke. And now he stood in her failing shop, looking nothing like the lean, earnest student she remembered. This man was broader, harder, with silver threading through his black hair at the temples. His face had sharpened into something almost cruel, all angles and shadows, except for his eyes. Those dark eyes she'd once drowned in were the same, though now they carried a weight that made her chest tighten. He spoke first, his voice deeper than she remembered, textured with smoke and distance. "Maya, you look exactly the same." It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation, clinical and careful. She realized her hands were shaking and forced them still, years of practiced composure sliding into place like armor. "Kenji, I'd say it's good to see you, but you broke into my shop after hours, so let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want?" He smiled then, a slight curve of lips that didn't reach his eyes, and something in that smile made her understand that the boy she'd loved was gone, replaced by someone far more dangerous. "I'm here about your uncle's debt. I'm the one he owed money to." The words hit her like a physical blow. Maya gripped the counter's edge, her knuckles going white against the dark wood. "You? My uncle borrowed money from you?" Kenji moved further into the shop, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor despite his size. He'd always moved like that, she remembered, gracefully, like a dancer or a fighter. Now she suspected it was the latter. "Not from me personally, from my organization. Your uncle was a regular at some very exclusive poker games. He had a problem, Maya. A bad one. She wanted to deny it, but the evidence was literally in her ledgers. The shop's finances bled dry over the past 2 years. I didn't know, she said, hating how small her voice sounded. I'm sure you didn't. Chen was good at hiding things. Kenji stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive with notes of cedar and smoke. But his debt doesn't disappear with him. It transfers, to me, to his heir, which is you. Maya forced herself to meet his gaze, to not look away from the man who'd once promised her forever and delivered nothing. I don't have $63,000. I can barely make rent. So whatever you're here to collect, I can't give it to you. For a long moment, Kenji just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he reached inside his coat and she tensed, but he only pulled out a folder, placing it on the counter between them, like a gauntlet. There's another way to settle this debt. She didn't want to open it. Every instinct screamed that whatever was inside would change everything, but she had no choice. The documents were complex, legal language that took her several minutes to parse. When she understood, she looked up at him in disbelief. You want to buy the shop? For $200,000? I want the building, the shop, the apartment above it, everything. You'd pay off the debt and walk away with more than enough to start somewhere else, somewhere far from here. There was something in his voice, an undercurrent she couldn't quite identify. And if I refuse? His jaw tightened, the first crack in his composed facade. Then the debt stands, and I'll be forced to collect through other means you won't like. Maya's mind raced. 200,000 would solve everything. Let her start over, somewhere safe, somewhere away from whatever world Kenji now inhabited. But this shop was all she had left of her uncle, of her parents, of the life she'd built from ruins. Why do you want this building? It's not particularly valuable. Kenji was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, because I stood outside it every day for 3 months, 10 years ago, watching you through the windows, trying to convince myself to stay away. Because I failed at that too, apparently. The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Maya felt something crack in her chest, a 10-year-old wound reopening. You left me. You didn't even say goodbye in person. I know. That's it? Just, I know? Kenji, I loved you. I would have gone anywhere with you, done anything. His hand moved as if to reach for her, then stopped, falling back to his side. I left because staying would have destroyed you. I was already in too deep, already committed to a path that had no room for someone like you. Someone good. Before she could respond, the shop's back door exploded inward with a crash that made her scream. 3 men poured through, all Asian, all armed with guns that looked military-grade and wrong in the antique-filled space. Kenji moved instantly, putting himself between Maya and the intruders with a speed that seemed impossible. His hand went to his waistband and came up with a black pistol that materialized like magic. Stay behind me, he said, his voice utterly calm, and Maya realized this was what he'd become in the years since they'd parted. This was his world now. The leader of the intruders, a man with facial tattoos crawling up his neck, smiled viciously. Tanaka-san, we heard you were getting soft, visiting old girlfriends. The Zhao family sends their regards. Kenji didn't fire, didn't even raise his voice. You're making a mistake. This location is neutral territory. Not anymore. Seattle's changing hands. Then everything happened at once. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space, and Kenji fired back with precise, controlled shots that spoke of extensive training. Glass shattered, century-old porcelain exploded into dust, and Maya dropped behind the counter as a bullet splintered the wood inches from her head. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only press her hands over her ears as the world dissolved into chaos and violence. But I still didn't know the worst part yet. I didn't know that by surviving that night, I'd become a target myself, or that Kenji's protection would come with a price I couldn't imagine paying. What I definitely didn't know was that the man I'd once loved now ruled an empire built on blood and loyalty, and that empire was at war. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it began. Maya's ears rang with the aftermath, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She heard footsteps, then Kenji's voice, tight with urgency. "Maya, are you hit?" She looked down at herself, expecting blood, but found only terror. "No, I don't think so." Strong hands gripped her arms, pulling her to her feet with surprising gentleness. Kenji's face was inches from hers, and for the first time since he'd walked into her shop, she saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Fear, not for himself, but for her. "We have to go. Now. More will come." She looked past him at the carnage. The three intruders lay motionless on her floor, and she should have felt something, horror or guilt or shock, but all she could manage was numb acceptance. This was real. This was happening. Kenji was pulling her toward the back exit, the one the attackers had used, and she let him, her legs moving on autopilot. "I can't just leave. This is my home." Your home just became a war zone. The Zhao family operates out of Portland. They're trying to move north into Yakuza territory. If they know you're connected to me, they'll use you as leverage. He pushed her into the alley behind the shop, where a black Mercedes waited with its engine running. A driver sat stone-faced behind the wheel, not even glancing at them as Kenji opened the back door and practically shoved Maya inside. The car's interior smelled like leather and danger, and Maya found her voice as Kenji slid in beside her. "Wait, stop. I need to understand what's happening. You said Yakuza. Your Yakuza?" He met her eyes, and for a moment she saw regret there, deep and genuine. "I'm not just Yakuza, Maya. I'm the Oyabun of the Tanakagumi, the ruling clan in the Pacific Northwest. I control everything from Vancouver to San Francisco. The gambling dens, the protection rackets, the shipping operations. Your uncle borrowed money from one of my subsidiary operations. When I saw the name Chen on the debt list, I thought it might be you. That's why I came myself instead of sending collectors." The words should have terrified her, and part of her was terrified. But another part, the part that had loved this man desperately a decade ago, just felt sad. "What happened to you? The Kenji I knew wanted to change the world through ethical business practices. You were going to work for the UN." A bitter laugh escaped him. That Kenji died the day his father's enemies put a bullet in his younger sister's head because he'd been naive enough to think he could escape the family business. I was 24. She was 18. I came back to Seattle to hide from my responsibilities, to pretend I could be someone else. Meeting you was the happiest accident of my life, and leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. The car wound through Seattle's streets, the city lights blurring past in streaks of neon and shadow. Maya's hands wouldn't stop shaking, so she pressed them against her thighs, forcing them still through sheer will. "You should have told me. I could have helped." "How? By getting killed alongside me? By becoming a target for every rival organization that wants to break my control? No. I loved you too much to curse you with this life." Present tense. He'd said loved. Present tense. Maya filed that away, knowing she'd examine it later when her mind wasn't fracturing with shock and adrenaline. "So what happens now? Those men came for you at my shop. Am I a target?" Kenji's jaw clenched, muscle jumping beneath his skin. "Yes. The Zhao family saw me enter your establishment. They have surveillance on all my movements. By tomorrow, every rival organization in the region will know that I visited you personally, stayed for over 20 minutes, and fought to protect you. In our world, that kind of attention means you belong to me. I don't belong to anyone." His eyes cut to hers, sharp and intense. I know that. I've always known that. But they don't, which means you have two choices. Option 1, I relocate you. New city, new identity, enough money to start over. You'll be safe, but you'll never be able to come back here, and you'll always have to watch your back. The car turned down a private drive, pulling up to a high-rise building that gleamed with wealth and power. Option 2, Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Kenji stepped out of the car and extended his hand to her, a gesture that felt loaded with significance. Option 2, you stay with me, under my protection, in my home, until the threat is neutralized. You'd be safe, but you'd be in my world, exposed to things you were never meant to see. Maya looked at his hand, remembering the last time he'd offered it to her, outside the Burke Museum on a rainy night when they'd been different people. She'd taken it then without hesitation, let him pull her close and kiss her like she was the only real thing in his universe. Now, that same hand offered her a choice between freedom and safety, between losing everything and losing herself. She took his hand. How long? Could be weeks, could be months. The Zhaos are persistent, and this war has been brewing for over a year. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, and he pulled her out of the car with the same gentleness he'd shown earlier, as if she might break under pressure. The building's lobby was all marble and glass, with security that nodded to Kenji with deference that bordered on fear. They rode the elevator to the top floor in silence, and Maya used the mirrored walls to study him. He stood with perfect posture, his coat still immaculate despite the violence he'd just escaped, and when he caught her looking, she didn't look away. "What?" he asked softly. "I'm trying to figure out how much of you is left, the real you." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor. "More than there should be, apparently. If I were smart, I would have sent my men to collect you and never come myself. But I wanted to see you. I've wanted to see you every day for 10 years. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse that stole Maya's breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Elliott Bay, the city sprawling beneath them like a constellation of earthbound stars. The space was decorated with minimalist precision, all clean lines and expensive materials, but what caught her attention were the small touches that felt out of place. A jade figurine on the mantel that looked exactly like one she'd sold years ago. A photograph, framed on a side table, of the Space Needle at sunset. Books on anthropology and ancient cultures lined a shelf near the window. He'd kept pieces of her, of them, in this sterile palace of power. Kenji shrugged off his coat, revealing a shoulder holster and the gun that had saved their lives. He removed it carefully, setting it on a table with practiced ease. "There are 3 bedrooms. You can take the one on the east side. It has the best morning light. I'll have clothes and essentials brought up within the hour." Maya walked to the windows, pressing her palm against the cold glass. Her reflection looked back at her, a woman who'd woken up this morning worried about debt and now stood in a crime lord's penthouse, her entire life upended in a matter of hours. "I need you to be honest with me. Am I a prisoner here?" Behind her, she heard him move closer, felt his presence like heat at her back. "No. You can leave whenever you want. But if you do, I can't guarantee your safety. The moment those men reported back before they died, your face became known. The Zhaos have extensive networks." She turned to face him, and the proximity stole her breath. He was so close, close enough that she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there before, close enough to smell his cologne mixing with the faint scent of gunpowder. "Why do you still care? It's been 10 years. Kenji lifted his hand slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His fingers brushed her cheek, a touch so gentle it made her throat tight. "I never stopped caring. I tried. Believed me, I tried to forget you, to bury what we had under work and duty and distance. But every woman I met, I compared to you. Every decision I made, I wondered what you'd think of me. You were the last good thing in my life before I became this." His thumb traced her jawline, and she shivered despite herself. "And what are you now?" "A monster, mostly. But around you, I remember being human." The vulnerability in his voice undid something in her chest, and before she could stop herself, Maya reached up and covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her face. "I looked for you. For 2 years, I looked for you. I hired a private investigator. I contacted the Japanese consulate. I even flew to Tokyo once with money I didn't have. And then I gave up. I had to, because waiting for you was killing me." Kenji's eyes closed, pain etching lines around them. "I know. I had people watching you, making sure you were safe. I knew about the investigator, about Tokyo. It took everything in me not to find you, not to break my own rule and come back." If you're feeling this story, hit that subscribe button now, because trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. The kind of tension we're building here doesn't come around often. Maya pulled back, needing space to think, to process the fact that he'd been watching her while she'd grieved him. "That's creepy, Kenji. You know that's creepy, right?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Extremely. But I needed to know you were okay, that you were living the life you deserved, even if I couldn't be part of it." She walked away from him, moving toward the east-facing bedroom he'd mentioned, needing distance from the pull she felt toward him. It was the same pull from 10 years ago, magnetic and dangerous, but now it was complicated by violence and secrets and the knowledge that he killed people. He killed people. The men in her shop were dead because of her, because he'd protected her, and she should feel something about that beyond gratitude. The bedroom was beautiful, decorated in soft grays and whites, with a bed large enough to get lost in and another wall of windows overlooking the city. Maya sank onto the mattress, her legs finally giving out as the shock caught up with her. She didn't hear Kenji follow, but suddenly he was there, kneeling in front of her, his hands carefully not touching her. "Talk to me. Tell me what you're thinking." "I'm thinking that people died in my shop tonight. I'm thinking that I should be calling the police, but I can't because you're a criminal, and I'm apparently complicit now. I'm thinking that you've been watching me for a decade, like some kind of stalker. And I'm thinking that despite all of that, part of me is glad you're here, which makes me either crazy or stupid or both." Kenji's hands fisted on his thighs, the only sign of tension in his controlled exterior. "You're neither. You're in shock, and you're processing trauma. Tomorrow, you'll probably hate me, and that's fine. That's appropriate. But tonight, you're safe, and that's all that matters." She laughed, a broken sound that hurt her throat. "Safe? I'm in the home of a Yakuza boss who I used to love, who I might still love, which is insane. And you're telling me I'm safe?" Something flared in his eyes at her words, something hungry and desperate, but he schooled his expression quickly. "The might still love part? Did you mean that?" Maya covered her face with her hands, exhausted and overwhelmed, and so far out of her depth she couldn't see the surface. "I don't know what I mean. I don't know anything anymore. This morning, I was worried about paying rent. Tonight, I watched you kill 3 men to save my life. My entire reality has collapsed." Kenji stood slowly, and she felt his absence like cold air. "Get some rest. We'll figure everything out tomorrow. There's a phone on the nightstand. It's secure. If you need anything, I'm 3 doors down." He was leaving, walking away, and Maya found herself speaking before she could stop the words. "Did you ever regret it, leaving me?" He paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders rigid with tension. When he spoke, his voice was rough, scraping against the silence. every single day, every single hour. Leaving you was supposed to keep you safe, to give you a chance at a normal life. Instead, it brought you here, into my world, into danger. So yes, Maya, I regret it. I regret all of it. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Maya was alone with her shattered life and her racing heart and the terrible, wonderful knowledge that the man she'd loved still loved her back. She should sleep. She knew that. Her body screamed for rest after the adrenaline crash. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw muzzle flashes and blood and Kenji moving with lethal precision. So instead, she got up and explored the room, finding an attached bathroom stocked with expensive toiletries and a walk-in closet that was empty except for a single garment bag hanging in the center. Inside was a dress, simple and elegant in deep emerald green, exactly her size, exactly her style. A note was pinned to the hanger in handwriting she recognized instantly. I bought this 3 years ago in Tokyo. I was going to send it to you, but I couldn't find a way to do it without breaking my own rules. It's yours now, like it was always meant to be. K. Maya held the dress against herself, looking in the mirror, and let herself cry for the first time since Kenji had walked back into her life. She cried for the boy he'd been, for the man he'd become, for the decade they lost, for the impossible situation they were in now. She cried until she was empty, until there was nothing left but a strange, fragile acceptance. Then she showered, washing away the smell of gunpowder and fear, and when she finally crawled into the bed, she found that, despite everything, she felt safe, which terrified her more than anything else that had happened that night. Because feeling safe in the home of a dangerous man meant she was already lost, already tangled in a web she had no business entering. And the worst part was, she wasn't sure she wanted to escape. Somewhere in the penthouse, Kenji stood in his own room, staring out at the same city, thinking about the woman sleeping 3 doors away. The woman he'd loved and left and never stopped wanting. The woman who was now a target because of him, because he'd been selfish enough to come to her in person instead of handling things through intermediaries. He'd spent 10 years building walls around his heart, turning himself into someone cold and efficient and separate from the man he'd been. And in one night, Maya had walked back in and demolished those walls like they were made of paper. His phone buzzed with messages, reports from his men about the Zhao attack, about increased movement in Portland, about the security measures being put in place. A war was coming, had been coming for months, and now Maya was caught in the middle of it because he couldn't stay away from her. Kenji made a decision then, one that would have consequences he couldn't predict. He would end this threat permanently, would use every resource at his disposal to make sure the Zhao family never touched her. And if that meant expanding the conflict, if that meant showing his rivals exactly how ruthless he could be when something he valued was threatened, so be it. He'd become a monster to protect his family once before. He could do it again. The next morning, Maya woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of fresh coffee. For a disoriented moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back and she groaned, pulling a pillow over her face. Everything had really happened. She was really in Kenji Tanaka's penthouse, really under his protection, really caught in some kind of gang war. She forced herself up and followed the coffee smell to the main living area, where she found Kenji in the kitchen, wearing black slacks and a white shirt rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with tattoos she'd never seen before. Traditional Japanese designs wound up his arms, dragons and cherry blossoms and kanji she couldn't read from this distance. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened. "Good morning. I wasn't sure how you took your coffee anymore." "The same. Black, 1 sugar." He poured it exactly right and slid the mug across the counter to her, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The touch sent electricity up her arm, and from the way his pupils dilated, he felt it too. I have meetings today, but I've assigned a security detail to stay with you. 2 of my best men. They'll be discreet. Maya sipped the perfect coffee and tried to process living with bodyguards. I need clothes. And my laptop. There's work I have to finish. Already handled. I sent people to your apartment early this morning. Your things will be here within the hour, everything you might need. The efficiency should have bothered her, but instead she found it oddly comforting. Thank you, and thank you for last night, for saving my life. Kenji's hands flattened on the counter, and she noticed his knuckles were scraped raw, probably from the fight she'd barely seen. You don't need to thank me for that. Protecting you isn't an obligation, it's a necessity, like breathing. The intensity in his voice made her pulse quicken, and Maya set down her coffee, needing to address the elephant in the room. We need to talk about what happens when this is over, when the threat is gone and I can go back to my life. We need ground rules. His mask slipped for just a second, letting her see the pain underneath. What kind of ground rules? The kind where we both acknowledge that 10 years have passed. We're different people now. Whatever we had before, it's gone. We can't just pick up where we left off. Why not? The question was simple, devastating. Maya gestured between them, at the expensive penthouse, at his tattoos and the gun she could see in a shoulder holster hanging by the door. Because you're a crime lord and I'm an antique dealer. Because you kill people and I can barely bring myself to step on spiders. Because our lives are fundamentally incompatible. Kenji moved around the counter, slowly, giving her time to back away. She didn't. And if I said I'd give it all up? If I said I'd walk away from this life for you? Her heart stuttered, hope and fear warring in her chest. Could you? Really? You said you came back because of your sister. Would giving it up now honor her memory or insult it? The question hit him like a blow. She saw it in the way he flinched. You fight dirty, Maya Chen. I learned from the best. You were always good at asking the questions that mattered. They stood there, inches apart, a decade of longing and regret between them. Finally, Kenji spoke, his voice low and rough. I can't give it up. Not completely. I have responsibilities, people who depend on me, oaths I swore to my father before he died. But I could step back, could transition power to my lieutenant, could limit my involvement to advisory only. It would take time, maybe a year, maybe 2, but I could do it, if I had a reason to. And I'm supposed to be that reason? To wait around for a year or 2 while you extricate yourself from organized crime, assuming you survive that long? That's not fair, Kenji. His hand came up, cupping her face with a tenderness that made her breath catch. Nothing about this is fair. It wasn't fair that I had to leave you. It wasn't fair that you inherited your uncle's debt. It wasn't fair that the Zhaos attacked your shop. But here we are anyway, and I'm asking you to consider the impossible. Consider giving us another chance. Maya's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. You broke my heart. You left me alone and grieving, and I had to rebuild myself from nothing. How do I trust that you won't do it again? You don't. You can't. Trust has to be earned, and I know that. But I'm asking you to let me try. Let me prove that I'm not that scared boy anymore, that I can protect you and be with you and make this work somehow. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed urgently, shattering the moment. Kenji pulled it out, his expression darkening as he read the message. What is it? Maya asked, fear creeping up her spine. The Zhaos. They've made a move. Attacked one of my warehouses in Tacoma, killed 3 of my men. They're escalating. He was already moving, grabbing his holster, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. I have to go. My security team will be here in 5 minutes. Stay inside until I get back. But what happened next was something neither of us saw coming, something that would change the game entirely and force me to make a choice I never wanted to face. Because the enemy wasn't just external. Sometimes the most dangerous threats come from inside. Maya grabbed his arm as he headed for the door, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "Wait, just promise me you'll come back. Promise me I'm not going to lose you again right after I got you back." Kenji turned, and the look he gave her was so intense, so full of everything they hadn't said, that it stole her breath. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, a claiming kiss that spoke of 10 years of denial and want. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and Maya responded instinctively, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "I promise, I will come back to you, Maya, always." Then he was gone, and she was left standing in his kitchen, her lips tingling and her heart racing, and the terrible knowledge that she'd just let herself hope again. The security team arrived as promised. Two serious-looking men who introduced themselves as Takeshi and Hiro then positioned themselves strategically around the penthouse. They were polite, professional, and absolutely would kill anyone who threatened her without a second thought. Maya spent the day trying to work, but her concentration was shot. Her laptop held research for articles she wrote freelance, deep dives into cultural artifacts and their histories, but the words blurred together on the screen. Instead, she found herself at the windows, staring out at the city and wondering where Kenji was, if he was safe, if she'd really let herself fall back in love with him in less than 24 hours. Around noon, Takeshi brought her lunch, a bento box from an expensive Japanese restaurant that she barely tasted. Around 3, her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Maya Chen?" The voice was male, accented, cold. "Yes, who is this?" "Someone who wants to help you. My name is Wei Zhao. I believe you know my family by reputation now." Maya's blood turned to ice. She should hang up immediately, should get Takeshi, but shock kept her frozen. "How did you get this number?" "I have resources. Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. Kenji Tanaka is using you. You're not under his protection. You're a prisoner, a bargaining chip. He'll keep you until you're no longer useful, then discard you like he discards everyone." That's not true. But doubt crept in despite her words. Was it true? Was she just a pawn in a game she didn't understand? Isn't it? Ask yourself why he really came to your shop, why he didn't send underlings to collect a simple debt. Ask yourself why he's kept you so close. It's not love, Miss Chen. It's strategy. Wei Zhao's voice dropped lower, more persuasive. "I can get you out. Clean papers, new identity, money to start over, somewhere he'll never find you. All you have to do is walk out of that building tonight. My people will be waiting." The line went dead. Maya stood there, phone clutched in shaking hands, as everything she thought she knew shifted. Was Wei Zhao telling the truth? Was she really just a tool for Kenji to use? She thought back to the previous night, to how quickly he'd moved to protect her, how he'd brought her to his home, how he'd kissed her this morning with what felt like genuine emotion. But he was Yakuza. Deception was probably second nature to him. She needed to think, needed space to sort truth from manipulation. But Takeshi was watching her with sharp eyes. "Everything okay, Miss Chen?" "Fine, just a spam call." But it wasn't fine, and for the rest of the afternoon, doubt ate at her. By the time evening fell and the city lights began to glow against the darkening sky, Maya had made a decision. She needed answers, real answers, not the careful half-truths Kenji had been feeding her. When he returned, bloodied knuckles, freshly bandaged, and exhaustion etched into every line of his face, she was waiting in the living room with her arms crossed. He stopped when he saw her expression, wariness replacing the relief that had flashed across his features. What happened? Wei Zhao called me today on a supposedly secure phone. Maya watched him carefully, cataloging every micro-expression. He said, I'm not under your protection, that I'm a prisoner, a bargaining chip. He offered to help me disappear. To his credit, Kenji didn't immediately deny it or make excuses. Instead, he moved to the bar cart, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, and downed it in one swallow before turning to face her fully. What did you tell him? Nothing. I hung up. But I need you to be completely honest with me right now, Kenji. Am I a guest here or a hostage? Is your protection real, or am I just a pawn in whatever war you're fighting? He set the glass down with a sharp click, and when he looked at her, his eyes were raw with something that looked like pain. You want complete honesty? Fine, here it is. When I first saw your uncle's name on that debt list, yes, I thought about leverage. I thought about how having you close might give me an advantage, might make the Zhaos hesitant before attacking, because they'd know I had something personal at stake. For about 5 minutes, I considered using you strategically. Maya's stomach dropped, nausea rising in her throat. So Wei was right. Let me finish. Kenji's voice cracked like a whip, commanding her attention. I considered it for 5 minutes, and then I saw you again, and every calculation, every strategy, every logical thought I had disappeared. You asked me yesterday if I regretted leaving you. The truth is, leaving you destroyed something in me that I never got back. I became efficient, brutal, exactly what I needed to be to survive and lead. But I stopped being human. Seeing you again, being near you, protecting you, it's the first time in 10 years I felt like anything other than a machine designed for violence and power. He moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes, the desperation. So yes, Maya, you're under my protection, real protection. Not because you're useful to me politically, but because losing you the first time nearly killed me, and I won't survive losing you again. If that makes me weak, if that makes me a liability to my organization, I don't care. You're not a pawn. You're the only thing in my life that matters anymore. Maya wanted to believe him. Every cell in her body screamed to believe him, but fear held her back. How do I know this isn't just another strategy? How do I know you're not manipulating me right now? Kenji's laugh was bitter, self-deprecating. You don't. That's the hell of it, isn't it? I've spent 10 years becoming someone who lies and manipulates for a living. Why should you trust anything I say? He pulled something from his pocket, a small box that made her heart stutter. When he opened it, she saw a ring, simple and elegant with a single diamond, slightly worn at the edges. I bought this 12 days before I left you. I was going to propose at the Japanese garden, by the moon bridge where we had our first real date. I carried it with me to Tokyo, to Osaka, to every city I've been in for the last decade. It's the one thing I couldn't let go of, even when letting go of you was supposed to be the whole point. He held it out to her, not as an offer, but as evidence. I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm not asking you to forgive me or trust me or even stay. I'm just showing you that what I felt then, what I feel now, it's the most real thing in my fucked up life. You can choose to believe that or not, but I can't prove it any other way. Maya took the box with trembling hands, staring at the ring that represented a future they'd never had. It was beautiful, exactly what she would have chosen for herself, and the fact that he'd kept it for 10 years said more than any words could. Wei said he could get me out, give me a new identity, money to start over. She looked up at Kenji, watching him absorb the words like blows. Part of me wants to take that offer, to run as far from this world as possible. But the other part knows that I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been if I'd stayed. Then stay. His voice was rough, urgent. Stay, and let me prove this to you. I know I can't undo the past, can't give you back the decade we lost, but I can try to build something new, something better. Maya closed the ring box and handed it back to him, watching his face fall before she spoke. I'll stay, but not because of grand gestures or decade-old rings. I'll stay, because despite everything, despite the danger and the violence and the impossibility of this situation, I still feel something when I look at you. And I need to know if that feeling is real or just the ghost of who we used to be. Relief crashed across Kenji's features so powerfully it almost brought him to his knees. He reached for her, then stopped, asking permission with his eyes. She nodded, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. They stood like that for a long moment, two broken people finding comfort in shared brokenness, before Maya pulled back enough to look at him. What happened today, at the warehouse? His expression darkened, the brief vulnerability replaced by the mask of the Oyabun. The Zaos are pushing hard, testing our defenses. They hit 3 locations simultaneously, killed 8 of my people total. It's worse than I thought. Wei isn't just trying to expand territory, he's trying to start an all-out war. Why? Because his father, the old Oyabun of the Zhao family, died 6 months ago. Wei's young, ambitious, and he wants to prove himself by taking down the strongest organization in the region, which is mine. Kenji's jaw tightened. If I don't respond decisively, I'll look weak. Other families will start circling, thinking they can take pieces of my territory. But if I escalate too much, we'll have a bloodbath that'll draw federal attention neither of us wants. Maya processed this, understanding for the first time the impossible balance he had to maintain. What are you going to do? Tomorrow night, there's a meeting, neutral ground, all the major families in the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to make Wei an offer, give him a way to back down without losing face. If he refuses, then we go to war for real. He cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbone. I need you to know that if fighting starts, truly starts, I might not be able to protect you the way I want to. You'd be safer far away from me. Is that what you want? For me to leave? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Kenji closed his eyes, a muscle jumping in his jaw as he fought some internal battle. When he opened them again, the raw need there made her breath catch. What I want is to keep you locked in this penthouse, where nothing can touch you, where I can see you every morning and know you're safe. What I want is to burn down anyone who even thinks about threatening you. What I want is 10 years back, so I can make different choices, better choices. His forehead pressed against hers, their breath mingling. But what I need is for you to make your own choice. Stay or go, Maya. But know that either way, I'll do everything in my power to keep you alive. She should go. The logical part of her brain insisted. She should take Wei's offer or find her own way out, far from Yakuza politics and violence and impossible love. But the part of her that had grieved Kenji for a decade, that had never quite moved on despite trying, that part wanted to stay and see if they could build something from these ruins. I choose to stay, for now, but I have conditions. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Name them. 1. You tell me everything. No more half-truths, no more protection through ignorance. If I'm in danger, I want to know exactly what I'm facing. 2. I'm not a prisoner. I can leave this building when I need to, with security if necessary, but I won't be caged. And 3. You let me help. That made him pull back, confusion replacing the cautious hope. Help how? Maya thought about her skills, her background, what she could possibly offer in this world of violence and power. I'm an anthropologist. I understand culture, tradition, hierarchy. I've studied Japanese organized culture extensively in my graduate work. Maybe I can help you find a solution to this conflict that doesn't end in war. Fresh perspective from someone outside your world. Kenji looked at her like she just suggested something impossible. Then, slowly, wonderfully, he started to laugh. It was a real laugh, the first she'd heard from him since he'd returned to her life, and the sound made her chest warm. You want to apply anthropology to Yakuza politics? Why not? At its core, it's about understanding power structures, honor systems, and finding ways to resolve conflict within cultural frameworks. I might see something you're too close to see. He shook his head, but he was smiling, genuine affection in his eyes. You're incredible, absolutely incredible. Most people in your position would be paralyzed with fear, but you want to help negotiate peace. Most people in my position didn't spend 10 years analyzing human behavior and cultural conflict for a living. Besides, if I'm stuck in this situation, I might as well make myself useful. Maya straightened her shoulders, feeling more like herself than she had since this started. So do we have a deal? Full transparency, freedom of movement, and let me contribute? Kenji considered for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Deal. But your safety is non-negotiable. You go nowhere without security, and if I say a situation is too dangerous, you listen. I can handle losing my territory, my position, even my life, but I cannot handle losing you again. Agreed. They shook on it, a formal gesture that felt absurdly normal given the circumstances. Then Kenji pulled her close again, this time kissing her with less desperation and more tenderness. It was the kiss she remembered from 10 years ago, sweet and searching, full of promise. When they broke apart, Maya asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why didn't Wei just kill me when he had the chance? If I'm such valuable leverage, why offer to help me escape instead? Kenji's expression went cold, predatory. Because killing you would have meant instant war with no possibility of negotiation, and even Wei isn't that reckless yet. But if he could get you to leave on your own, if he could make you disappear or turn you against me, that would destabilize me emotionally without the same political consequences. It's actually a smart move. But I didn't take it. No, you didn't, which tells me two things. One, you're either brave or insane. He smiled slightly. And two, some part of you still trusts me, even when you probably shouldn't. Maya thought about that, about the leap of faith she'd taken. Maybe both, brave and insane. That's what I always loved about you. You never chose the safe path, even when you should have. They ordered dinner from a restaurant Maya couldn't pronounce and ate together at the massive dining table that probably rarely got used. She asked him questions about his organization, testing his commitment to transparency, and he answered them all honestly, even when the answers revealed things that should have frightened her. She learned about the legitimate businesses that fronted his operations, shipping companies and nightclubs and real estate holdings. She learned about the traditional oaths and rituals that bound his family together, the code of honor that governed behavior even in a world built on crime. She learned about his father's death 3 years ago, how Kenji had taken over leadership when he was barely ready, how he'd had to eliminate challengers and prove his strength to maintain control. And she learned about his sister, Yuki, the girl whose death had changed everything. Kenji's voice went soft when he talked about her, grief evident even after all these years. She wanted to be a doctor. She was brilliant, kind, everything I wasn't. And they killed her to get to my father, shot her in a coffee shop in broad daylight because she refused to deliver a message. She was 18 years old, Maya. Just 18. Maya reached across the table and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. I'm sorry. I can't imagine that pain. It's why I came back. why I gave up on the idea of being anything other than what my bloodline demanded. Because if I'd been there, if I'd been fulfilling my duties instead of hiding in Seattle pretending to be normal, maybe I could have protected her. You don't know that. You can't carry that guilt forever, Kenji. His eyes met hers, dark and haunted. Can't I? I chose love over duty once, and my sister paid the price. That's why leaving you was the only choice I could make. I couldn't risk your life the way I'd risked hers. The admission hung between them, explaining so much about his departure, about the wall he'd built around his heart. Maya stood and moved around the table, cupping his face in her hands. You can't live your whole life as penance. Yuki wouldn't have wanted that for you. How do you know? Because sisters love their brothers, and no one who loved you would want you to be this lonely, this isolated. She kissed his forehead, gentle and comforting. You've been punishing yourself for 10 years. Maybe it's time to forgive yourself and try living again. Kenji pulled her into his lap, burying his face against her neck, and she felt moisture on her skin that might have been tears. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other through shared grief and loss, until finally he pulled back and kissed her properly, with hunger and need and the promise of more. "Stay with me tonight," he whispered against her lips. "Not for sex, just stay with me. I don't want to be alone." Maya nodded, knowing she was crossing a line but unable to stop herself. They moved to his bedroom, a space even more minimalist than the rest of the penthouse, and she borrowed one of his shirts to sleep in. It smelled like him, like cedar and smoke and something indefinably Kenji. And when they lay down together in his massive bed, she felt safer than she had in years. He held her from behind, his arm wrapped around her waist, his breath warm against her neck, and Maya let herself relax into the embrace. Tomorrow would bring challenges, the meeting with Wei, decisions about their future, the reality of his dangerous world. But tonight, she let herself have this, the simple comfort of being held by someone who loved her, who had always loved her, even when he'd had to let her go. "Maya?" Tenji's voice was drowsy, heavy with approaching sleep. "Yeah?" "Thank you for staying, for giving me another chance I don't deserve." She turned in his arms so she could see his face, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "We're both taking a chance here. Let's try not to waste it this time." He kissed her, soft and sweet, then pulled her close again, and they drifted off together, two people who'd found their way back to each other against all odds. But the peace wouldn't last long, because the next morning brought news that would change everything and force both of them to confront exactly how far they were willing to go for each other. When Maya woke, Kenji was already up, dressed in a sharp black suit that made him look every inch the powerful Oyabun he was. She could hear him in the living room, speaking rapid Japanese in a tone that sent chills down her spine. Something was wrong. She dressed quickly and found him surrounded by his lieutenants, Takeshi and Hiro among them, all wearing serious expressions. The conversation stopped when she entered, and Kenji's face softened fractionally before hardening again. "What happened?" she asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Kenji gestured to his men, and they filed out silently, leaving them alone. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, which told her exactly how angry he was. "Wei Zhao took someone, a civilian employee at one of my nightclubs, a young woman named Sakura who does bookkeeping. He's holding her as collateral for tonight's meeting, insurance that I'll show up and negotiate in good faith." Maya's blood ran cold. He kidnapped someone? That's escalation. It's more than that. Sakura is 22 years old, a college student working part-time. She has no connection to my operations beyond legitimate employment. Taking her violates every rule of our world, breaks the codes that keep us separate from civilians. Kenji's hands fisted at his sides. Wei just declared that he doesn't care about honor or tradition. He'll use anyone, hurt anyone, to get what he wants. What are you going to do? She already knew, could see it in the dangerous glint in his eyes. I'm going to that meeting. I'm going to get Sakura back, and then I'm going to make Wei Zhao regret ever hearing my name. The cold promise in his voice should have frightened her, and part of it did, but another part understood the necessity. In his world, weakness invited destruction. Mercy could be fatal. Let me come with you. Kenji's head snapped up, shock replacing fury. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Think about it strategically, Maya pressed, using logic since emotion wouldn't work. Wei offered to help me escape, which means he thinks I might be sympathetic to his position. If I show up with you, willingly by your side, it undermines his narrative. It shows that I choose you, that his manipulation didn't work. Or it puts you directly in his line of fire. I'm already in his line of fire. At least this way, I'm acting instead of reacting. And maybe, just maybe, I can read the room in ways you can't. Fresh eyes, remember? Outside perspective? Kenji looked like he wanted to refuse, to lock her in the penthouse and keep her far from danger. But he'd promised transparency, promised to let her contribute. She watched him war with himself, before finally, reluctantly nodding. You stay by my side the entire time. You don't speak unless I indicate it's safe. And if shooting starts, you get behind me, and you stay down. Understood? Understood. She moved closer, pressing her palm to his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath the expensive suit. I know this isn't what you want, but we're in this together now. Let me stand with you. His arms came around her, holding tight, and she felt him shudder slightly. You're going to be the death of me, Maya Chen. You know that, right? Or maybe I'll be what keeps you alive. You said it yourself. I make you remember you're human. Maybe that's what you need in there. Someone to remind you that there are solutions beyond violence. The meeting was set for 8 p.m. at a warehouse on the waterfront, neutral territory supposedly guaranteed by the other families. Maya spent the day preparing, reading everything she could find about Yakuza negotiation traditions, about Wei Zhao's background and motivations, about the political landscape Kenji navigates daily. She learned that Wei's father had been a traditionalist, respected but old-fashioned, and that Wei had made his reputation by being ruthless and innovative. He saw the old codes as weaknesses to exploit, not strengths to honor. She also learned that Kenji had maintained power by being unpredictable, by balancing calculated brutality with unexpected mercy, by making alliances other families wouldn't risk. He was respected, feared, but also trusted to keep his word, which was rare in his world. If Wei broke that trust by taking civilians, he damaged more than just his relationship with Kenji. He damaged his standing with every organization that relied on those unspoken rules. You might have leverage you're not seeing, Maya told Kenji as they prepared to leave. Wei violated code. The other families will be watching to see how you respond, but they'll also be judging him. If you can frame this right, you're not just fighting Wei, you're defending the structure that keeps all of them safe. Kenji studied her, respect in his eyes. You see it, the bigger picture. It's what I do. Analyze power structures, understand how systems maintain themselves. Wei's move was aggressive, but it was also stupid if he wants long-term respect. Use that. When they arrived at the warehouse, Maya's mouth went dry. Armed men lined the perimeter, representing at least 6 different organizations based on the variety of tattoos and insignias. This wasn't just a meeting between Kenji and Wei. This was a gathering of every major power in the region. They were escorted inside by stone-faced guards, and Maya stayed close to Kenji, drawing strength from his steady presence. The warehouse interior had been converted into a makeshift conference space, with a large table in the center and chairs around it. 5 men already sat waiting, older, distinguished, exuding authority. These were the other Oyabuns, the leaders who controlled territory from Vancouver to San Francisco. And at the head of the table sat Wei Zhao. He was younger than Maya expected, maybe 35, handsome in a sharp-edged way that reminded her of a knife. His suit was expensive but flashy, meant to impress rather than intimidate, and when he saw her, his eyes lit with interest. "Tanaka-san, I see you brought a guest. How unexpected." His English was perfect, tinged with British inflection. Kenji's hand found the small of Maya's back, a possessive gesture that she didn't mind. "Chen is here of her own accord. She wanted to see what kind of man offers help while kidnapping innocents." The room went silent, tension crackling through the air. Wei's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. "I don't know what you're referring to. I've kidnapped no one." Sakura Kanaka, 22 years old, accounting student, taken from outside her apartment yesterday evening by 4 of your men. Don't insult me by lying when we both know the truth. One of the other Oyabuns, an older man with silver hair and traditional tattoos covering his hands, spoke up in Japanese. Kenji responded in the same language, his tone sharp and formal. The conversation went back and forth, heated but controlled, and Maya wished desperately that she understood more than the few words her undergraduate elective had taught her. Finally, the silver-haired man switched to English, probably for her benefit. "Wei-san, did you take this girl?" Wei leaned back in his chair, finally dropping the pretense. "I secured an asset to ensure good faith negotiation. She's unharmed and will remain so if Tanaka-san is reasonable." "She's a civilian," another Oyabun interjected, this one younger, maybe 40, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. "We don't touch civilians. That's the line we don't cross, or we bring federal heat down on all of us." "Times change," Wei said dismissively. "The old rules were made when we had less to fight over. Now, with everything digital, trackable, we need new strategies." "New strategies that violate everything we stand for?" Kenji's voice was ice, controlled fury given sound. "You want to lead in this region, Wei-san? Then act like a leader, not a thug. Release Sakura now, and we can discuss territory, arrangements, whatever you need. Keep her, and you make an enemy of everyone at this table." Maya watched Wei's face, saw the calculation there. He'd miscalculated, thought the others would see his aggression as strength, but instead they saw chaos, a threat to the system they all depended on. "And if I refuse?" Wei challenged, but there was uncertainty creeping into his voice now. This was the moment Maya had been waiting for, the opening where an outside perspective might shift everything. She cleared her throat softly, and every eye in the room turned to her. Kenji tensed beside her, but he didn't stop her from speaking. "May I say something?" she asked, directing the question to the silver-haired Oyabun, who seemed to be the de facto neutral party. He nodded slowly, curiosity evident. Maya took a breath, then addressed Wei directly. "You're right that times change, and that new strategies are sometimes necessary, but you're wrong about which traditions to break. The prohibition against harming civilians isn't just about honor, it's about survival. The moment organized crime becomes indistinguishable from terrorism, you lose the tacit acceptance that lets you operate. Federal agencies, international task forces, they all stay relatively hands-off as long as you keep your violence contained within your world. Break that barrier, and you bring down a tension that will destroy all of you." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You took Sakura to prove you're strong, but strength without strategy is just violence. What you've actually proven is that you're willing to risk everyone's operation for short-term advantage. That doesn't make you a leader, it makes you a liability." Wei's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, the scarred Oyabun laughed, a deep, booming sound that broke the tension. "I like her. Tanaka-san, where did you find someone with such big courage?" "She found me," Kenji said softly, pride evident in his voice. The silver-haired Oyabun leaned forward, his gaze sharp on Wei. The woman makes sense. What you've done threatens us all, Wei-san. Return the girl now, or we vote on whether your organization remains recognized in this region. The threat was clear. If the other families voted against him, Wei would lose access to trade routes, protection agreements, all the infrastructure that made his operation viable. He'd be fighting alone against multiple enemies. Wei's hands clenched on the table, knuckles white with fury, but he was smart enough to recognize when he'd lost. Fine, the girl will be released within the hour, unharmed. Now, Kenji corrected, his voice brooking no argument. She gets released now, or I leave this table and we settle things the old way. Your choice. The room held its breath. Finally, Wei pulled out his phone and made a call in rapid Cantonese. 2 minutes later, a door at the back of the warehouse opened and Sakura stumbled through, frightened but unhurt. She ran to Kenji, who passed her immediately to Takeshi with instructions to get her somewhere safe. Maya felt relief flood through her, along with satisfaction that her intervention had helped shift the balance. The negotiation continued from there, tense but productive, with territory arrangements made and agreements reached that would prevent open war. Wei got some of what he wanted, expansion into areas Kenji had been willing to concede anyway, but he'd lost the respect of his peers and the advantage he'd hoped to gain. By the time they left the warehouse 3 hours later, Maya was exhausted, her adrenaline finally crashing. Kenji kept his arm around her the entire drive back, protective and warm, and when they reached the penthouse, he pulled her into his arms the moment the door closed behind them. That was the most terrifying and impressive thing I've ever watched, he murmured against her hair. You faced down a room full of killers and lectured them about strategic thinking. I figured if I was going to die, I might as well die saying something useful, Maya joked weakly, then found herself shaking as the reality of what she'd done caught up with her. I can't believe I just did that. I can. You've always been brave, even when you probably shouldn't be. Kenji pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in both hands. You saved Sakura tonight. Your words, your perspective, they gave Wei a way to back down without losing everything. You found the solution I couldn't see because I was too close, too angry. You would have gotten her back either way. Maybe, but your way prevented war, prevented more death. That matters, Maya. That matters more than anything. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Maya melted into it, needing the connection after hours of tension. They stumbled toward his bedroom, shedding clothes between kisses, and this time when they fell into bed together, it wasn't about comfort or grief. It was about need and want and 10 years of denial finally ending. Are you sure? Kenji asked, even as his hands mapped her body with reverent touches. We don't have to. I can wait as long as you need. I'm sure, Maya whispered, pulling him closer. I'm sure about you, about this, about us. No more waiting, Kenji. We've waited long enough. So he made love to her with the same intensity he brought to everything else, thorough and focused and absolutely devoted to her pleasure. And Maya let herself fall completely, trusting him with her body the way she was learning to trust him with her heart. If this story has you hooked, make sure you're subscribed because the ending is going to blow your mind. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this resolves. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, sweat cooling and hearts still racing, and Maya traced the tattoos on his chest, following the dragon that wound around his ribs. What does it mean, the dragon? Protection, power, wisdom. I got it after my sister died, a reminder of what I was fighting for. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. But it's incomplete. There's supposed to be a phoenix on the other side, balance. I never finished it because I didn't feel balanced, didn't feel like I deserved that completion. Maya rose up on her elbow, looking down at him in the dim light from the windows. Maybe it's time to finish it. Maybe you're allowed to be whole again." Kenji's eyes softened, and he pulled her down for a kiss that was tender rather than passionate, a promise rather than a claim. "Maybe I am, if you're here to remind me." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither had nightmares. The next few weeks settled into a routine that was almost normal, if normal included armed guards and secure phone lines. Wei Zhao kept to his agreements, the other families maintained their support, and Kenji began the slow process of transitioning power to his most trusted lieutenant, a man named Daiichi, who'd been with the organization for 20 years. Maya divided her time between helping Kenji navigate the political complexities of his world and slowly rebuilding her own life. She couldn't return to the shop, it had been too damaged in the attack, but insurance money and Kenji's connections helped her start an online business dealing in authenticated Asian antiquities. She'd been wary of accepting his help, worried about being kept, but he'd been insistent that it was an investment, not charity. "You have expertise I can use," he'd said seriously. Legitimate businesses that deal in art and antiques are perfect for establishing provenance on objects that might otherwise raise questions. "You'd be helping me transition to legal operations." So she'd accepted and found herself building something new, something that combined her passion with practical application. She worked from the penthouse mostly, though occasionally she'd go out to meet clients, always with Takeshi or Hiro shadowing her movements. She should have resented the constant security, but she'd come to appreciate these men who risked their lives to keep her safe. 3 months after that pivotal warehouse meeting, Kenji came home early one evening, his expression serious but not frightened. Maya looked up from her laptop where she'd been cataloging a collection of Edo period netsuke, immediately knowing something significant had happened. "Wei's dead," Kenji said without preamble. His own organization turned on him. Apparently, he'd been skimming from shared operations, lying to his lieutenants about profits. They found out and handled it internally. Maya closed her laptop slowly, processing. "Do you think someone set him up?" "Probably. The man who's taking over, Chen Wu, he's traditionalist, smart, respected, someone I can actually work with. My guess is Chen found evidence of Wei's theft and used it to stage a coup." Kenji poured himself a drink, his movements controlled but tense. "Wei's death solves my immediate problem, but it also reminds me how tenuous power is in this world. One mistake, one moment of vulnerability, and it's over." She went to him, taking the drink from his hand and setting it aside, then wrapping her arms around him. "Then it's good you're getting out. How's the transition going?" Slowly. "Daiichi is ready to take over operations, but some of the older members are resistant to change. They see my stepping back as weakness." Kenji rested his forehead against hers, breathing her in. "It might take longer than I thought, maybe another year." "That's okay, I'm not going anywhere." They'd had this conversation before, about timelines and futures and what life might look like when Kenji was finally free of his obligations. Maya had been clear that she wouldn't wait forever, but a year, even 2, that was manageable if it meant they could eventually build something real. "I want to take you somewhere," Kenji said suddenly, pulling back to look at her. "Somewhere I should have taken you 10 years ago." They drove to the Japanese garden, the place where they'd had their first real date all those years ago. It was closed for the evening, but Kenji had keys, connections, and they walked through the manicured paths alone, surrounded by carefully cultivated beauty. When they reached the moon bridge, the arched wooden structure reflected perfectly in the still water below. Kenji stopped and turned to face her. "I was supposed to propose to you here. That was the plan, 10 years ago, before everything fell apart." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring box she'd seen once before, the one he'd carried for a decade. "I'm not proposing now. It's still too complicated, still too dangerous to tie you to me officially. But I want you to know that my intentions haven't changed. When this is over, when I can offer you a life that isn't built on violence and secrets, I'm going to ask you properly, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life hoping you say yes." Tears streamed down Maya's face, but she was smiling, her heart so full it hurt. "You're an idiot if you think I'd say anything else." "Is that a pre-acceptance?" His lips quirked in amusement. "That's a promise that when you ask, the answer will be yes. But you're right, we wait. We do this properly, when we're both free." Maya took the ring box from his hands and opened it, looking at the simple diamond that had waited a decade for her finger. "Can I keep this? Not to wear, just to have. A reminder that some things are worth waiting for." Kenji's throat worked as he swallowed hard, emotions flickering across his face too quickly for her to catalog. "It was always yours. Everything I have, everything I am. It's all been yours since the moment I met you in that museum." They kissed on the moon bridge as the sun set over Seattle, two people who'd found their way back to each other through violence and loss and stubborn, impossible love. And for the first time since he'd walked back into her life, Maya felt genuine hope that they might actually have a future together. The months that followed weren't easy. There were setbacks and complications, moments when Kenji had to handle situations that reminded Maya exactly what world he came from. There were nights he came home with blood on his hands, metaphorically if not literally, and she had to reconcile loving him with knowing what he was capable of. But there were also moments of profound beauty. Kenji teaching her Japanese in the early mornings over coffee, quiet dinners where they talked about art and culture and philosophy like the graduate students they'd once been. Nights spent tangled together, learning each other's bodies and hearts all over again. Maya met more of his organization, the men and women who depended on him for protection and livelihood, and began to understand that his world wasn't black and white. These were people who'd been pushed to the margins of society, who'd found family and purpose in an organization that valued loyalty above all else. She didn't condone the violence, the criminal operations, but she understood the human need that drove it. Kenji also began meeting her friends, the few who'd stuck by her through the years. It was awkward at first, explaining him to people who remembered her heartbreak from a decade ago, but he won them over with quiet sincerity and obvious devotion to her. Her best friend Jasmine pulled her aside after one dinner and said simply, "Whatever he did wrong before, he's trying to make it right now. Don't let fear of the past keep you from the future." Wise words from someone who'd held her through countless nights of crying over this same man. 14 months after that first night, when Kenji had walked back into her shop, he came home one evening with news that changed everything. "It's done. I signed the papers today. Daichi is officially Oyabun of the Tanakagumi. I'm out." Maya looked up from where she'd been arranging flowers, a hobby she'd taken up to bring life into the stark penthouse. "Out? Completely?" "Completely. I retain advisory status if they need historical perspective, but I have no operational authority, no decision-making power. I'm free, Maya. For the first time since I was 24 years old, I'm free." She set down the flowers carefully, her hands trembling. "What does that mean for us?" Kenji crossed to her, taking those trembling hands in his steady ones. "It means I can offer you the life I promised. No guards, no threats, no midnight calls about territory disputes. It means I'm just a man who loves you, who wants to build something normal with you." "I don't know if we're capable of normal," Maya said, but she was smiling, tears streaming down her face. "We're probably too damaged for normal." "Then we'll make our own version, slightly abnormal, perfectly us." He dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring that had lived in his pocket for over a decade, and Maya's breath caught in her throat. "Maya Chen, you are the bravest, most stubborn, most incredible woman I've ever known. You walked back into my life when I least deserved it, and somehow saw past the monster to the man underneath. You made me believe I could be someone worthy of love again. I know I can't give you back the 10 years we lost, can't undo the pain I caused. But I can promise you every day forward, every moment I have left devoted to making you happy. So I'm asking you properly, here, now, will you marry me? Maya pulled him to his feet, laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, yes, you impossible man. Of course, yes. I've been waiting 10 years for you to ask me properly. I'm not about to say no now. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her, which she supposed it had been. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the penthouse that had felt like a beautiful cage became the site of their new beginning. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the Japanese garden, on that same moon bridge where he'd promised her a future. Jasmine was her maid of honor, Daiichi was his best man, and the guest list was carefully curated to include only people who genuinely wished them well. No politics, no obligations, just love. Maya wore the green dress he'd bought her 3 years ago in Tokyo, altered slightly to accommodate the changes in her body, and Kenji wore a traditional hakama that made him look like he'd stepped out of history. When they exchanged vows, his voice cracked with emotion, and she had to wipe tears from his cheeks before kissing him to seal their marriage. They honeymooned in Japan, visiting Kyoto and Osaka, places that held significance in Kenji's family history, but now became part of their shared story. He showed her the temples and gardens of his childhood, introduced her to distant relatives who'd never been part of the criminal organization, and slowly shed the last remnants of the Oyabun persona he'd worn for so long. Maya watched him transform, saw him relax in ways she hadn't known he was capable of. He smiled more, laughed easier, touched her constantly like he needed the physical reassurance that she was real and staying. "What are you thinking?" she asked one evening as they sat in a traditional ryokan, looking out at a carefully raked Zen garden. Kenji pulled her closer, his arm around her waist. "I'm thinking that I spent 10 years believing I didn't deserve happiness, that I'd sacrifice that right when I chose this life. And now I'm married to you, free of obligations that nearly destroyed me, building a future I never thought possible. I'm thinking that redemption is real, and it looks like you." She turned in his arms, cupping his face. "We both got a second chance. Not many people get that. Let's not waste it." "Never," he promised, and kissed her as the sun set over Kyoto, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They returned to Seattle and bought a house, nothing ostentatious but comfortable, with a garden where Maya could grow flowers and a home office where she could work on her antiquities business. Kenji used his connections and resources to start a non-profit organization helping at-risk youth, giving them alternatives to the criminal life he'd been born into. It was his way of balancing the scales, of using his past to create better futures. Maya expanded her business, eventually opening a small gallery downtown that specialized in Asian art and cultural artifacts. She hired staff, taught classes on art history and authentication, and found purpose in sharing the knowledge she'd accumulated over years of study. Some days were harder than others. Kenji still had nightmares occasionally, dreams of his sister and the men he'd killed, and the weight of leadership he'd carried for so long. Maya would hold him through those nights, grounding him with her presence until the demons retreated. And sometimes Maya would see someone who reminded her of Wei Zhao, or would hear news of Yakuza activity and remember how close she'd come to losing everything. On those days, Kenji would take her to the Japanese garden, to their bridge, and remind her that they'd survived, they'd won, they were here together. 2 years into their marriage, Maya discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified them both, bringing up fears and questions about what kind of parents they could be given their pasts. But it also brought joy, the possibility of creating life instead of being surrounded by death, of building a family that chose love over loyalty to criminal enterprises. Their daughter was born on a rainy spring evening, entering the world with a cry that made Kenji weep openly. They named her Yuki, after his sister, a way of honoring the girl who'd been lost and celebrating the new life they'd created. When Kenji held his daughter for the first time, Maya saw something shift in him, the final piece of healing clicking into place. "She's perfect," he whispered, awe coloring every word. "She's ours," Maya corrected, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "And she'll grow up knowing nothing but love and safety. We'll make sure of it." He looked at her then, his wife and the mother of his child, and in his eyes was everything they'd survived to reach this moment. "I love you, Maya. I loved you when we were just kids playing at being adults. I loved you through 10 years of separation when I thought I'd never see you again. And I'll love you until my last breath and whatever comes after." "That's good," she said, smiling through happy tears, "because you're stuck with me now. No more running, no more sacrificing yourself for some misguided idea of protection. We face everything together from here on out." "Together," he agreed, and they sat there in the hospital room, their newborn daughters sleeping peacefully between them, two people who'd been broken separately and found wholeness together. The road hadn't been easy. It had been violent and complicated and full of impossible choices. But in the end, love had been enough. Not the easy, uncomplicated love of fairy tales, but the messy, hard-won love of two people who'd seen each other's darkness and chosen each other anyway. Years later, when Yuki was old enough to ask questions, they told her a carefully edited version of their story. How they'd met in college and fallen in love. How circumstances had pulled them apart for many years. How they'd found their way back to each other against all odds. They didn't tell her about the Yakuza, about the violence and the danger, and the warehouse meeting where her mother had faced down a room full of killers. Those stories were for later, if ever. Truths to be shared when she was old enough to understand complexity and nuance. What they did teach her was that love requires courage, that second chances are precious, that the past doesn't have to define the future. They taught her about honor and loyalty, and the importance of choosing who you want to be rather than accepting what circumstances try to make you. And they showed her, every day, what it looked like when two people committed fully to each other, when they chose partnership and trust and devotion despite every reason to give up. Daichi occasionally visited, bringing news from a world Kenji had left behind, and Maya would serve tea and listen to stories of territory negotiations and family politics with the detached interest of someone watching a movie about someone else's life. Kenji would ask pointed questions, offer advice when requested, but he never looked regretful about his choice to leave. "Don't you miss it?" Maya asked him once, after Daichi had left following a particularly lengthy visit. The power? The respect? The influence? Kenji considered the question seriously, then shook his head. "I miss some of the people. I miss the sense of purpose sometimes, feeling like I was protecting something important. But I don't miss the violence, the constant threat, the weight of responsibility for so many lives. And I definitely don't miss the loneliness of being someone that people fear more than they love." He pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "Everything I gave up, everything I walked away from, it was worth it to have this, to have you, to have Yuki, to have a life where my greatest worry is whether the gallery made enough profit this quarter or if our daughter is eating enough vegetables. That's not boring to me, Maya. That's everything I never thought I could have." She turned in his embrace, going up on her toes to kiss him. "Good answer. You get to stay." "Like you could get rid of me now," he teased, and she laughed because it was true. They were bound together, not by obligation or circumstance anymore, but by choice, the most powerful bond of all. Sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and Yuki was sleeping peacefully in her room, Maya would take out the small jade figurine that had survived the attack on her shop. It was a dragon and phoenix intertwined, representing balance and complementary forces, and it had become her talisman, her reminder of where they'd started and where they'd arrived. Kenji had completed his tattoo finally, adding the phoenix to balance the dragon on his chest. The artist had woven the two creatures together so they seemed to dance, separate but connected, powerful in their unity. It was beautiful, a permanent declaration of the balance he'd found, and Maya loved tracing the lines when they lay in bed together, following the story written on his skin. Their life wasn't perfect. They argued sometimes, disagreed on parenting approaches or business decisions, or how to spend their rare free time. But they'd learned how to fight fair, how to listen even when angry, how to choose each other even when it was hard. And every argument ended the same way, with apologies and compromise, and the reaffirmation that they were a team, partners in everything. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Kenji took Maya back to the Burke Museum where they'd first met all those years ago. They stood in front of the same exhibit on Japanese cultural artifacts where he'd approached her, nervous and charming and completely unaware that she'd noticed him watching her for the previous 20 minutes. "What would you tell them?" Maya asked, looking at their reflection in the glass case. "If you could go back and talk to those kids, what would you say?" Kenji thought about it, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. "I'd tell them that the road ahead is going to be harder than they can imagine, that they're going to lose each other and think it's forever, that they'll both be changed by pain and loss in ways that will seem insurmountable." He paused, emotion thickening his voice. "But I'd also tell them that it's worth it. Every moment of pain, every year of separation, every impossible obstacle, it's worth it because they end up here, together, happy, building something beautiful from the ruins." Maya leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I'd tell her to be brave, to trust that some loves are strong enough to survive anything, even 10 years and completely different worlds. I'd tell her that the boy she's about to fall for will break her heart, but he'll also put it back together better than it was before." "That's beautiful," Kenji murmured against her hair. "You always were better with words than me." "You do okay," she said, smiling. They stayed at the museum for hours, revisiting the places where their story had begun, remembering who they'd been and marveling at who they'd become. And when they finally left, walking hand in hand into the Seattle evening, Maya felt complete in a way she'd never expected to feel again after that first heartbreak. The truth was, their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated and full of moral gray areas that would make some people uncomfortable. But it was theirs, authentic and hard-won, and more precious because of everything they'd overcome to achieve it. So, if you're looking for a simple love story, this wasn't it. But if you want to know what it looks like when two people refuse to give up on each other, when they fight through violence and danger and their own worst fears to build something real, then this was exactly that. Maya Chen and Kenji Tanaka, the antique dealer and the former Yakuza boss, the woman who should have run and the man who should have stayed away. They chose each other, again and again, until choosing each other became as natural as breathing. And in the end, that choice made all the difference. Their daughter grew up strong and confident, protected by parents who understood the cost of security and the value of peace. She knew nothing of warehouses and gunfire and midnight negotiations, only the love of two people who'd found their way through darkness to light. Years became decades, and they grew older together, silver threading through Maya's black hair and deepening the lines around Kenji's eyes. They traveled, they worked, they loved, they lived. And every morning when Kenji woke beside his wife, he sent a silent thank you to whatever force had brought her back into his life when he'd needed her most. "Do you have any regrets?" Maya asked him once when they were in their 60s and sitting on their porch watching the sunset. "Only one," Kenji admitted. "I regret the 10 years we lost. I regret not being braver sooner, not finding a way to make it work instead of running. But even that regret is tempered by gratitude, because maybe we needed that separation to become people who could actually build something lasting." He took her hand, the rings on both their fingers worn smooth by decades of wear. "What about you? Any regrets?" Maya thought about it, really thought, before shaking her head. "Not anymore. I used to regret waiting for you, spending 2 years of my life looking for someone who'd made it clear he didn't want to be found. But that searching taught me about my own strength, about what I was capable of surviving. And when you came back, I knew myself well enough to make real choices, instead of just following my heart blindly." She squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar strength there. "We got a second chance that most people never get. I don't regret any of it, not even the pain, because it brought us here." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. Two people who'd loved and loved again, who'd faced impossible odds and somehow won. Their story wasn't over, wouldn't be over until one of them took their last breath. But this chapter, the chapter of struggle and fighting and desperate hope, that chapter had closed. What remained was peace, hard-earned and precious and absolutely worth every sacrifice they'd made to achieve it. "What about you? Any regrets?" Maya thought about it, really thought, before shaking her head. "Not anymore. I used to regret waiting for you, spending 2 years of my life looking for someone who'd made it clear he didn't want to be found. But that searching taught me about my own strength, about what I was capable of surviving. And when you came back, I knew myself well enough to make real choices, instead of just following my heart blindly." She squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar strength there. "We got a second chance that most people never get. I don't regret any of it, not even the pain, because it brought us here." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. Two people who'd loved and loved again, who'd faced impossible odds and somehow won. Their story wasn't over, wouldn't be over until one of them took their last breath. But this chapter, the chapter of struggle and fighting and desperate hope, that chapter had closed. What remained was peace, hard-earned and precious and absolutely worth every sacrifice they'd made to achieve it. And if someone had told that 22-year-old girl crying over a goodbye note that one day she'd be sitting here, married to the man who'd left her, happy and whole and utterly content, she never would have believed it. But that was the thing about love, real love, the kind that survived separation and danger and impossible circumstances. It didn't make sense. It wasn't logical or safe or predictable. It just was, powerful and undeniable and absolutely worth fighting for. So that's the story of how Maya Chen and Kenji Tanaka found their way back to each other. It's a story of second chances and hard choices, of violence transformed into peace, of love that refused to die no matter how many reasons it had to. It's a story that proves that sometimes the impossible becomes possible when two people refuse to give up on each other. And it's a story that reminds us that our past doesn't have to define our future, that redemption is real, and that love, real love, can overcome anything. Even 10 years, even different worlds, even ourselves. If this story touched you, if you felt even a fraction of what these two went through, do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment about what moment got you the most, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because love stories like this one, the messy, complicated, absolutely real ones, they deserve to be heard. And who knows, maybe you need to hear that second chances are possible, that love can survive anything, that giving up isn't the only option when things get hard. Maya and Kenji's story proves all of that and more. So take it with you. Let it remind you that happy endings aren't always easy, but they're always worth fighting for. Thanks for being here, for listening to this story, for caring about two people who found their way through darkness to light. Until next time, remember that the best love stories are the ones where people choose each other, again and again, no matter what stands in their way. That's what makes them real, that's what makes them last.